First,
Hi, Margot.
yes,
Hi.
hi. Welcome to our Happy New Year. My name is Margot Hecker, if you don't know me. Welcome to our first Community Conversations of 2025. Before we start our topic today, I would like to explain the concept of community conversations to those of you who have never been here. This group was started nearly 10 years ago by Lorene Vedder and her husband Mike.
And Margot, not Margot, but Mrs. Hostetter.
Okay, did you hear that?
Madonna Hostetter.
And Madonna Hostetter, okay. And a few other people. We are a loosely based and a loosely run group based here in Menominee. We don't have dues, we don't have a pledge or a specific set of beliefs other than a strong respect for the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We generally meet every month except in the summer. Community Conversations is based here in Menominee Public Library, which does not charge us 1 cent to use this facility. We encourage donations and bequests to the library. We deeply appreciate being here and the support and trust we receive from the library. The topics of this presentation are local control in Act 12 with just a smidgen of Act 11. Okay, Acts 11 and 12 were adopted by the Wisconsin legislature on June 20th, 2023. Lorene Vedder will present the background information. She has researched this for hours. She last updated her presentation last night. I mean, this is good. Our special guests today are Representative Clint Moses. Is he here? No, he didn't arrive. Okay, Senator Jeff Smith and City Administrator Eric Atkinson. Participants in this event are expected to behave with civility and respect. Please raise your hand if you want to speak during the presentation. Lorene will stop the presentation and answer your questions. This or the other officials here. This is a public forum. This is not social media, and you are not a faceless participant, so be nice. Okay. Our next community conversations will be next month, Saturday, February 22nd, when Georgina Teagart will explain the Dunn County Community Foundation, which helps local nonprofit groups meet their goals via financial support. And one last thing, I have mentioned a book club for this book, The Fall of Wisconsin. We are going to meet 4 times, hopefully over 8 weeks. Okay, so the author is Dan Kaufman, Kaufman. This is a 2018 book. Kaufman is originally from Wisconsin, and it's The Fall of Wisconsin, the conservative conquest of a progressive state bastion and the future of American politics. And my idea is that we'll meet 4 times, we'll discuss the book, and then the people who are in the book club will present to the group on what has happened in Wisconsin since the book. Okay? So we'll need to do some work on this. Okay? And I've set, sign-up sheet is in the back. And that's it from here. And now, here with no further ado is Lorene Vedder.
Well, thank you all for being here, and I want to thank my speakers for being here. And I don't know if Clint Moses is going to come still. I'm hoping that he is. He was the first to respond and accept the invitation to come speak to us. So I'm hoping he'll come and contribute also. Okay, today you will hear a story about local governments. We interact with them every day. They provide vital services for us. They are our townships, our villages, our cities, and our counties. And we rely on the counties and towns to provide those roads that connect us. We rely on our cities to provide clean water and many other services, and we're very glad to have a city administrator here to talk to us about all the things that we have to, you know, provide for people here in Menominee. Local communities are places where we take care of each other. They are the local government that is the closest to us of all governments. The other part of this story is the effect of the Wisconsin legislature on our local governments. The legislature and the governors in combination oversee finances and local laws, and these can cut off our funding that we have for our cities. We can have mandates issued that require certain services provided by the local communities, and we can have a limit and control over our local law or ordinances that we pass. In this 21st century, the cities have had to struggle, the villages, the townships, the counties, to fund services. And we've all had to fit in a mold of certain requirements that we are required to do by law. One of these laws that has put a lot of restrictions on us is Act 12. It's one of the many state laws. I first heard about it on June of 2023. And it was because the governor had signed into law this Act 12, which I didn't know was Act 12 at that point, but that we could not have any more advisory referendums. And, you know, I thought, well, what's going on here? I thought this was part of our Constitution. How can they take away our advisory referendums? So I was not really happy about that. And I also thought, well, don't our representatives want to hear from us and know what we think? Okay, so over the last 10 years, we've had 3 county-wide referendums for Dunn County. And the first that we had was 2014, and it was about money in politics and the effect of the Citizens United decision. And that was a very popular referendum, and people voted 72% that they wanted to get rid of the corruption from that. And then in 2020, we had the Fair Maps referendum that passed. And then we were the first in 2022 to have a referendum on medical care, asking for medical care for everyone. So then I went to this wonderful budget meeting we had at the city council, because we were invited there by City Administrator Eric Atkinson, who sits to my right. And he said, I really want you to all be a part of our budget meetings. And I want you to understand what we're going through here, you know, to put this together. So I came in at the end of November, and I first became aware of Act 12. I'd never heard of it as that. And all the constraints and the concerns of the city council members. They were all worried about, well, we have to do some cuts here, and we don't like the cuts that we have to do to our social programs. But, you know, we have to make this budget work, you know, for the community. And they all expressed how in the future they were really worried about having to do more cuts and how they could make the budget stretch to meet the needs of the community. So anyhow, I wrote to Representative Moses and also to our Senator Jeff Smith. And, you know, I started to, you know, say I would really like to find out about what this Act 12 is all about. But it ended up that I had to do the research on my own. But, you know, I really do appreciate that you're here. Thank you for coming, actually. Yay! Glenn, you were the first one to accept coming, you know, so I'm really glad you're here.
So I put the pressure on the rest of them.
Yes, you did.
So anyway, I hope you all can have us understand what this new act is, and, you know, if there's any potential changes in this new act. You know, Eric was telling me that there may be some changes. So I want you, the 3 of you, to participate and let us understand this better. So with that, we're going to go to the first slide. Act 12 is called our Shared Revenue Act, passed by the legislature and then signed into law on June 20th, 2023 by our governor. Okay, this is an article on May 17 by the Cap Times. Do we really need state lawmakers running local government? And I don't know if any of you down there that go to Madison to represent us have heard of this reporter, Dave Ziefel?
Oh, yeah.
You have, okay. This is from his article. The purpose of establishing the income tax in 1911 was to ease local government's total reliance on property tax, which had become a major burden on homeowners and farmers in particular. The income tax would be administered by the state. 70% of it would be returned to municipalities, and 20% was to be returned to the county governments. The state would keep the remaining 10%. And Dave said on this article, there never was any thought to requiring the local governments how to use the money other than how they saw fit. Okay, the history of shared revenue in Wisconsin since then. Over the next century, revenue sharing significantly dropped. And I'm not sure if we had to use those for like Medicaid dollars or whatever, but it happened. And the cities have been hurting because of the loss of shared revenue. And there are now inexplicable variations in the amount of aid each municipality receives. Okay, the report from the League of Wisconsin Municipality Revenue Sources. In 2015, Wisconsin municipalities received 42% of their revenues from property tax. Nationally, you know, across all the other states, the average was 23% was from property taxes. So they're not being hit so hard by property taxes. And 21% came from sales and income taxes in other states. Wisconsin's combined state and local county sales tax rate in Wisconsin averages 5.44%. It is the lowest sales tax in the Midwest, and counties are the only type of local government that can use sales taxes. Most counties in the state have needed to take the 0.5% county tax, the maximum allowed. In 2006, state law put caps on property tax increases to slow the growth in municipal real estate levies. In this law, local governments needed voter approval through a referendum to exceed that limit. Wisconsin is among the 10 states most reliant on municipal property taxes, and of these states, Wisconsin has the tightest cap on increases of this tax source, now being restricted to tax growth related to net new construction. Churches, schools, government buildings pay no real estate tax even though they receive municipal services. So, with saying all this, can I get some responses from my panel here?
Sure.
Do you have a,
Is this on?
yeah, it should be.
Thank you. So, yes, the municipal levy limits were placed upon municipalities and counties going back to 2005, 2006. And my understanding, and I was working for the government at that time, that those laws were put into place because we had some jurisdictions that were getting themselves into a bit of a financial bind, and the state felt compelled to try to step in and slow some of that particular growth. And they had limited it to increasing levies to approximately 2% on net new construction. That has ultimately changed around 2012 to net new construction. Some of that creates some significant challenges as it pertains to being able to address with services related to increased costs and inflation, as well as demands placed by communities. And so what I'm hoping for, and Act 12 did help in some areas, but it also created some other challenges in other areas, is that as we move into the next legislative session, that we're able to make some adjustments. And I know that these two gentlemen will be working on that here very vigorously here in the next few months. So I think this is a very timely discussion to be able to talk about this as to how reliant we are on both property taxes and then the impact that shared revenues and aids have on municipalities and counties as well.
So, thanks for putting this together. In fact, I was surprised that this is a topic that would bore most people to sleep. that you want to do this. We got 50 people in the room that's listening to us.
This is one of our better crowds.
Yeah, this is great. Okay, makes me nervous, Steve. One of their better crowds. So here we are. In 2023, when this happened, it was the beginning of a session year, just like it is now for 2025. At the beginning of that session year, it became clear that shared revenue was in trouble. Our municipalities were in trouble, and why were they in trouble? Because if you go back to all the other actions that were taken, you go back all the way to when 70% went back to the municipalities, and now we're down to single digits, about in 2023. That was going back, and was eaten away over all those years by different ideas and thoughts that were happening. Now, I will tell you, the urgency of 2023, we did not have a committee. We created a committee, or I should say the majority party created a committee after session even started on shared revenue. I was on that committee as a former local official myself. I was the town chair, and shared revenue has always been and levy limits have always been let's just say a P in my mattress that just won't go away. And so so I'm going to probably skip around. We're going to have a lot more conversation, but I want you to know there also one thing I wanted to say is that there was this perfect storm of what happened to you guys too. In fact, was a change in shared revenue, which was a good overall change that needed to happen. I think any municipality, most municipalities would tell you, except Eau Claire, Janesville, Oshkosh, the mid-sized cities were hurt by this change, and we tried to make changes at the last minute there, but this was negotiated, and it was negotiated hard. And particularly back to the loss of the ability to pass referendum, that is, I'm so with you, Lenore, on that. That's losing the voice of the people. That up until then, I'm even going to throw in what has happened to school districts, right? This really became this idea that came from school districts having limits placed on them, and as far back as 1993. Well, it worked so well in some people's minds that they thought we should do this to the municipalities too, which they did in 2006. So, and I'm being sarcastic there, but I was told over and over at other panels that I'd be on with my colleagues from the other side of the aisle would say, yeah, but this idea of levy limits on school boards, particularly at the time, allows the citizens to decide in referendum. But now they've even taken that away. And they've tried to do that with school districts as well, and make it more and more difficult to pass referendums. Now that said, that's politics. But I'm going to tell you, in 2023, it was like a perfect storm, because we also did something that was long time overdue, and that was to remove the personal property tax that had been hanging over a lot of people. That also had been frittered away over the years, so that it became unfair, because particularly in 2012 or 13, I believe, in a last-minute addition to the budget, we call it the Man-Ag Amendment. It was manufacturing and agriculture got an exemption from personal property tax, and that's all their machinery, and that was a huge hit on our budget. But also, now they've got exempted, but all these small businesses that we all rely on, we're still paying personal property tax of their equipment in their businesses. So it was a long time coming that either we restored the exemption, or we took it, gave everybody the same exemption, and that's what happened in 23. So you got these two things that happened: a change in shared revenue and the change in that formula, and you got this personal property tax, which I have the numbers here of what you lost in Menominee and others lost in that collection of personal property tax. So that's, I think, a good start to this conversation, and things that you need to know as we move forward. There's a lot of numbers that go along with that.
Well, I will share my new senator's sentiment as well. I was surprised when I pulled in. I think I got the last parking spot here at the public library. So I was surprised there would be this many gathered to talk about shared revenue. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about. I could go around in circles quite a bit on this. I'll kind of start from the backside. My senator actually had mentioned, some of the medium-sized cities that did not fare as well. The city of Menominee actually was one of the ones on my list, actually in my district, that fared about the worst when it came to this new formula. Senator Smith did vote for this as well as I did. We needed some Democrat support. This was a clear issue early on in last session. Primarily looking statewide, the city of Milwaukee was in deep, deep trouble. So beyond politics and partisanship, this is an issue where we had to fight for more rural, northwest Wisconsin areas. And there was a lot of negotiating that went back and forth. I was obviously not on the shared revenue committee. I'm more kind of the healthcare guy. But one of my good friends, Tony Kurtz, was in the negotiations on this, and Tony and I talked regularly about it as I was advocating for, at the time, St. Croix, Polk, and Dunn County, now Dunn and Chippewa. But one of the things that really came up is how long it took to get these stakeholders. A lot of times our constituents, people in this room, don't realize how much these stakeholders play when they're talking to us at the Capitol. So by that I mean the Counties Association. The big three players, the Counties Association, the Towns Association, and the League of Municipalities. And to get them to agree on something, this has been, as Senator would know and Eric would know as well, 20 to 30 years of back and forth of stagnation, basically. Didn't matter if it was a Democrat in control or a Republican in control. Shared revenue had not been addressed in years, and it was really an emergency. So I think we made great improvements. Obviously, there's some things that I know in talking to Eric and you as well that you're unhappy with. This was definitely a compromise. Overall, I think it was a win and a much needed thing for our local municipalities. I did bring with me, I brought 20 handouts thinking that would be enough to cover this, but I actually brought forward what we had projected when the bill passed and then was signed into law, and then actually the good news, which it's actually better than we anticipated, because it's tied to the state economy, the state sales tax. So if our economy is good, the shared revenue is going to improve. So I don't know if you have seen these new numbers. I actually just got them on Friday, so it's an improvement. Not as good for Menominee as the rest of them, but yeah, thanks for having me today, and I look forward to discussion. So,
Anything from the audience that you have, any questions or comments?
Can you list the three big players again?
The Towns Association, the counties, and the League of Municipalities.
Maybe you should talk to them more, because it's being
Oh,
recorded.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
the Wisconsin Towns Association, the Wisconsin Counties, and the League of Municipalities. And all three of those groups that I would say meet with, doesn't matter if it's Senator Smith or myself, they're in our offices regularly.
Why did Menominee fare so much poorer?
It has to do with the formula.
I don't. I think Eric is the one that has to answer that question. Yeah, yeah.
So there's a formula that's utilized by the state to calculate what the shared revenue will come out. And yes, we didn't fare as well as other municipalities did in the shared revenue. We weren't as negatively impacted as, say, some of those mid-sized cities. I would say this, though, our shared revenue that we get, other than, well, we get a variety of different state aids, including that shared revenue. Our shared revenue did go up, which was we're very grateful for that too, by the way, for the work that the legislature did. Some of our other state aids were not so fortunate. But I'm hoping, and I feel confident from our League of Wisconsin Municipalities that they've been reaching out to the various legislators, and it sounds like as they're crafting this next budget, they are taking into considerations the formulas that they're utilizing, as well as the other state aids that are used, like state aids to provide services to state buildings and nonprofits like the schools and whatnot. So although there are some challenges that came with Act 12, it still was extra funds that came to us. The other areas where we've fallen short on state aids or expenditure restraint, I'm hoping that we're gonna be able to work to get to a positive conclusion there. But again, it's very challenging. I do feel very good that we have our legislators here that are willing to listen to this, as well as our League of Municipalities. I can't speak for the towns or the counties association, but they're feeling good that they're listening and there may be some compromises coming up. So I'm hoping for good governance. So I'm optimistic.
I'm actually quite delighted to hear all this. It's very, very positive.
Yeah, I'm going to add, you know, and I just told Eric before we started that I listened in on the budget meeting that the city council had, and Eric then mentioned to the audience or to the members there that it's sort of like new law, new formula. It took a hit, but with the hopeful idea that the new formula and everything attached to it is going to bring everything back up. And I also want to mention, though, it was even before the law was implemented. Menominee already had lost in 2022 $1.3 million in valuation. In 2023, and this is again before the law actually did anything, $7.7 million in valuation. So it was something that was already trending before the law. So the valuation is a whole different animal, but I think the 31.9 million that we're now seeing, that hurts certainly, and I'm sure a little bit of part of that is personal property. It's also the way interest rates have gone up and dropped the valuation of properties automatically or naturally. And you know, it's just all those other things that we rely on that a lot of us have no control over. It is economy when it comes down to it.
We're just going around in circles, but so far there's a lot of agreement. One of the other things I should add is that Menominee actually does fare well when it comes to some of the other aids, obviously compared to other municipalities in Dunn County. For instance, utility aid, which includes, you know, the backfill for property owned by the utility companies, like for example, XL Energy or possible Dunn Energy Cooperative. And then also they receive a lot of aid from the UW system, because if you look at the downtown area especially, a lot of that property is owned by University of Wisconsin system as well. So, and I've got all those numbers, so before you leave, definitely if you don't have one of these handouts or something like that, ask.
Okay, we'll continue with the slides. The Daily Cardinal talks about that problem with levy limits. In May of 2011, there was another hit, a change, further limiting real estate taxes as a source of revenue for local governments. The minimum levy increase for inflation was lowered from 3% to 0%, and levy limits prohibited municipalities from increasing their base levies by more than 1% total value of all taxable property. If a municipality levy exceeds the allowable limit, it must reduce that municipality's shared revenue payment in the following year by an amount equal to the excess levy. Now, that's a bit heavy for me to understand all that, but maybe Eric can respond to that.
That is a lot when it comes to the levy limits. So right now, to just kind of get it as the most simplistic piece, is we are limited to net new construction that takes place in our community. The net new construction, depending on if you're in a community that has a tremendous amount of growth, you have your local governing body has a lot of options to be able to, whether they want to increase revenue and make adjustments. If you're in an area like Menominee that has been relatively static in growth, that can create a challenge, because then the levy limit is going to be that net new growth. Our net new growth was right around 1%. So that put a little bit of a handcuff on our city council to try to be able to make decisions. Now, because taxes are exceptionally complicated, there are other things that factor into those formulas where we can essentially levy our debt service to try to help offset some of those limits. But you also have to be very cognizant that if you are borrowing and then applying that to offset levy, that's still money you have to pay back. And we generally will borrow based on general obligation notes or bonds, and we guarantee them based on our levy. So what that means is that we're saying our taxes that we levy, our community will pay our debt first. So we don't want to borrow so much to try to offset certain costs or levies. We have to be very cognizant that that money has to get paid back. So it still has that very limiting factor on local government as far as what they can do. Now, they can go to a referendum, so like the city council can go to a referendum to try to increase it, either a temporary increase or do an ongoing increase. Though that presents its own certain challenges too as well. And it is a very complicated process to take place, and if you do exceed those levy limits without having to leverage that debt obligation, and every community is a little different as to what they want to borrow for, you can be penalized on those shared revenues. So Mr. Moses had put out that we receive revenues for the UW system because we do. One of the reasons why our shared revenue will look higher than, say, a city of similar size is because we do have the UW system, and they're right in the middle of our downtown, which is prime real estate for either housing or development. So we do get some shared revenues in that area that another community wouldn't have. And I'll give a quick example. Say you have the city of Hudson, which is around the same size as us. Their shared revenue will be approximately $250,000. Our shared revenue is going to be several $1 million because they do not have a university taking up their private real estate in there. So the state does recognize that there are those challenges and have made adjustments. So it is such a complicated piece on how these revenues works, as well as the taxes work, and as well as how we can generate revenue. And I'm again optimistic that we'll be able to come up with some different ways to try to offset this property taxes that you get hit with, because we're so reliant on property tax that will fund local government as well as state government as well. And it's a complicated process. So I don't know if that really answered everything on the question, but it is very challenging. I'm just very happy that we have legislators now that are looking at tackling this, because it was Mr. Moses that said it sat stagnant for 20 some years, and then Mr. Moses, Mr. Smith worked together to try to address it. So,
Jan Morlock from Menominee. So, Eric, what would you say is at stake here for the city of Menominee? Those of us who can't go or who haven't been to a budget hearing of the kind that you and Lorene were talking about, what's sort of sitting at the brink here if we don't get this problem mitigated?
I think if we don't get the problem mitigated, we're going to have to make some tough choices as to what kind of services do we want to continue to provide to the community, to ones that we're willing to live without. And I see a lot of faces in the room, and every one of you have your own opinions and thoughts as to what's important to you, and as you should. And whenever we make a decision to add or eliminate, that can cause a potential hardship for someone, or it could be a benefit. And we're trying to do our best to make sure that, one, we keep our taxes down because we are so reliant on property taxes, but as well being able to make sure that we have good roads to drive on that are safe, we have parks that are accessible for everybody, individuals with disabilities, that are providing an area that's conducive to growing our economy. And that's a very tough balancing act to try to be able to choose on where we want to go. And then anytime you're looking at restricting those services, people get frustrated too, because if they're used to a certain service, or if it's become important to them because societal needs change, the culture of the communities change, that becomes difficult. I'm hoping as we move, I don't know if it'll happen in this budget cycle, but I'm hoping as we move forward and look at how we utilize revenues in the state, both for taxes, that we take a look at some of our neighboring states on how we can utilize things like sales tax, income tax, other sorts of modalities to try to lessen that impact on the property tax. And I will say this, even though we took a hit on the personal property tax, I think at the end of the day, and I believe I mentioned this at a council meeting, at the end of the day, I think it'll ultimately be better for everybody, because if we still had the personal property tax in its full measure that it once was, you would see industries like your Walmart distribution center that has put in like an $85 million robotics upgrade. If that personal property tax was in there, I can all but guarantee they would have taken a look at another community to build that, because that would have been a tremendous tax increase. And then conversely, as we're trying to grow our industrial park to build onto our tax base so we can lessen onto the regular property owner, if we had that personal property tax in place, it would be very difficult to attract manufacturers to come in that have to put in those kinds of machines, robotics, computer technology. That makes it very difficult to assess. So I do think, although it hurt a little bit, at the end of the day, I do think that was a good thing that the state did. So we took kind of a half a step back, but in 10 years' time, I think that'll end up being 2 steps forward at least.
Well, I think you're more worried about losing industry to other states. Actually, that's what it's all about.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm gonna kind of feed into some of that things that we're talking about. Over the course of time, you saw that history, and thank you for that, Lorraine. That's really important. And that's the other thing about this crowd here. Isn't this great? I mean, it's a civics lesson that most people will not bother finding out what's going on. And this is so important that you're doing that. So I think Clint would agree, we don't always work with logical solutions either. That's part of some of our problem. So when the issue's happening that we're eating away on that 70%, 50%, it comes down and now it's down to 11% or whatever it is, 10% that goes back to communities. The legislature starts looking at, oh my God, look at these local boards are raising property taxes, and people are complaining about their property tax, and now we're the worst in the country on property taxes. We're going to have to do something about that. So they freeze our local boards from doing what they need to do to make up for what they've lost. Well, that was the solution that the legislature came up with. Rather than looking at maybe the solution, we should have been looking in the mirror. And the solution should have been, maybe we shouldn't have been giving that or cutting into that shared revenue to begin with, to put boards in the position that they're in to have to raise. The only way to raise revenue was to do it through property tax. It was the only avenue they had, and now we're taking that away from them. So that's something to think about. And then the other part is the only way to address, or the only way to raise that money coming in from the state is net new construction. Now, this is where I get into the illogic of that, is that a community like Menominee, and smaller communities even, they don't necessarily get net new construction. People come in and say, hey, there's an empty building, I'm going to refurbish this building and turn it into something else. That's not net new construction. So you've got a new business that comes in there, and that's a good thing, and all that's good, but that does not help when we're trying to, when the services increase that you need to provide, but you're not able to raise the revenue to be able to provide those services until somebody decides to come in and tear that building down and build a new building, and then you can probably do something about it. But you see the illogic behind that, it just doesn't work. It's like that whole umbrella we put over everything when we pass policy, it just doesn't work for everyone. Now, City of Eau Claire, I think they've been able to hang tight or do really well because look at all the cranes over the last 5 years or more that have been working in Eau Claire. That's working for a bigger city. But when it comes to a city, a municipality of 10,000 or 15,000 or 2,000, it's not working for them. And I think that those are key points to remember how this works in the first place, and that net new construction hangs over their head.
Once again, I opened up a lot of thoughts. I don't try and wrap all this up. Start on the personal property tax. I would absolutely agree with Eric. I was fortunate enough to be one of the first ones to actually get into the DC and see the upgrades. Incredible stuff they're doing there as far as efficiency and stuff at the DC. And you look over the history, what that's done for our local economy, having them here. And then also as a small business owner that's had to deal with the personal property taxes over the last 2 decades, when I look at it, the exemptions as brought up before, was unfair with some of the different industries versus mine, which is a healthcare industry. And then I look at comparables and how it was enforced. You know, I have a business, I was reporting absolutely everything. A comparable business would be reporting half or 25% of what I was on it. So the enforcement just wasn't there from the state either. And honestly, the personal property tax was a very small portion of our tax revenue. The governor supported that one the last few years at least as well. So it was one we thought was fairly likely, being in the majority, that we could actually get across the finish line. And then another one I'm very familiar with, and Eric had brought this up too, is probably the best comparable for us for communities is River Falls. The only difference is River Falls has more growth than Menominee does, especially in the outskirts. And if you've been in that area where it's pretty much filled between Hudson and River Falls, they do not get quite as much UW reimbursement, but their campus is also smaller than UW Stout as well. Not as good either, but that's my opinion. I think I'm fairly safe here. Although, I kind of knew that actually too, and I do. My oldest will be graduating from there this spring as well, but I'm partial to UW Stout, obviously. But yeah, it's one of those things. You know, the formula doesn't always work out exactly. It's not fair to everybody. You know, I can go back on school district funding as well. Obviously, serving on the board here, our school district has been very responsible with their money, but many times gets penalized because of it, because of the funding formula. And I fully realize that. Trying to convince colleagues that it's not fair is not always an easy thing to do. Another thing I was going to mention too, we talk a little bit about sales tax revenue. There is a push from one county in particular in Wisconsin, which is a very conservative, great Republican county, Waukesha County, wants to increase their sales tax to deal with some of their budgetary issues. I think once that can of worms opens, I think others would probably follow suit. And I am very much in favor of local control. If Dunn County wants to raise taxes on its individuals and businesses for more services, and people decide to move away, that's kind of up to local control. If they want to provide good services and people value them and they want to move to the area, that's also up to our local control as well. So I'm pretty open. I think many times state government overreaches. That's kind of a libertarian in Clint, for those of you that didn't realize that, but I think we already have too much overreach on government's part anyway. I don't think we need to grow it.
Oh, okay, Marvel. Okay, I have a question, and it has to do with net new construction. Okay.
Can you
is
speak
net new-
louder?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Good. Yes.
Thank you. Okay. My question is about net new construction in the city of Menominee. Is net new construction considered new houses, new buildings, building permits? Okay, that is, in my opinion, where the city of Menominee is falling down. We need more housing.
Are there any other comments or questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a question. Everybody's talking about different formulas for shared revenue. And I just have a question. Is there some kind of cap at the state level on the state budget that's allocated to shared revenue? Could that cap get raised? You know, I mean, you hear a lot about, you know, budget surpluses at the state level, and I'm curious about the state budget and how that also feeds into the shared revenue discussion.
I'm going to start just because I've been in state government the least compared to Senator Smith, but the one advantage we have, in my opinion, in a state budget is it has to balance. Our revenue and expenditure has to balance. Obviously, I come from a perspective with the federal government that that's not the case, and I don't like it because it just continues to grow debt, push things down the road, create more and more problems. But you know, in the state government, our choice is basically either cut things or increase our revenue generating system. When it comes to local, I'd rather see more growth by attracting more businesses here, so we're not having to cut services. And I think all of us would probably agree on that.
So directly answer your question is that there is no cap. The state, and we already heard it from Eric, as the economy grows, the state brings in more, and that hopefully goes into shared revenue and goes back to the municipality. That's the theory behind it.
I would say in one area where there is a cap that does have an impact on local government is in the expenditure restraint program that was created by the state. I apologize for not knowing the exact year that it was created, but the purpose of the expenditure restraint program was to reward municipalities. It was done it was either right around the time the levy limits were put into place or shortly after. But the purpose of it was if municipalities and local government maintains a good mill rate that's not excessive and they stay within or below what those levy limits are, you can qualify for an expenditure restraint program which offers some additional revenue to come on in. When the program first came out, a community of our size could qualify for approximately about $180,000, $190,000 of additional revenue if we kept below the levy limits. There's a caveat to it too. You have to maintain a formula of at least 5 mills in your levy limit using the equalized value formula, not the assessed value formula that we use for our mill rate. And then over the years, what happened is there's a pool of money that's put into this place. And as more communities qualified for this expenditure restraint, you had to share and split it out, so the cost gets reduced. So the last expenditure restraint payment that we'll receive is about $41,000. When the next round comes, and it's going to be about 2026 for qualification for an expenditure restraint, we will not qualify for the expenditure restraint. And the reason is because our mill rate has gone below 5 mills. So we've actually lowered our mill rate. Part of the issue with that is I mentioned a little bit about the assessed values. Our assessed values have not kept up with our equalized values, which creates a wide gap in our formula. So what would happen is right now we're at about 4.88 mills. If the city wanted to qualify for the expenditure restraint program, we would have to raise taxes close to $1 million to qualify for $41,000. So one of the things that we've talked to the league about, and the league is trying to work with legislators, as well as I spoke to some reps from the governor's office too, is if there can be some sort of reform with the expenditure restraint program, because we want to, I feel much like you gentlemen do, you don't want to excessively raise taxes and you want to try to keep things under control. But it seems kind of conflicting to have to raise the tax to try to get to this program. And it is a complicated thing because of the formulas that are used, and other suggestion we put in is trying to utilize just the equalized values that the state helps come up with our assessors versus our local assessed value. But that may be a topic for another day, because that's about an 8-hour conversation, and we all have things to do.
Okay, I think we'll just move on, or we'll not get through.
I was just going to, first of all, I'm glad everybody's still awake and dozing off. But and Eric, you did a great job of explaining that more thoroughly, because you also touched on it in the city council budget hearing as well. And now you've heard when I say we don't always work with logic. Now you really heard a piece of that. But I wanted to add one other thing. There are programs that have been created to try to motivate outside the box thinking to be able to bring in that revenue. So I think it was $100 million was set aside in the last budget for cooperative ideas. So if for instance, the city of Menominee cooperated and worked with the fire, or the towns around them, and created a fire cooperative, there would be an opportunity to bring in some revenue. Or if it would, but that's just one example. But usually it's EMS, for instance, has really been the one that people go after. But what we're finding, I think, what we found, I'm not sure that even if that $100 million even went out the door, because for the most part, communities have already figured that out and done that on their own before this, because they were desperate for EMS, for instance, as an example again. But it's at least, as a legislature, we are trying to to figure out ways of getting that money back to the municipalities, use it for specific programs and grant programs. You want to-
I'll keep it really short, I promise. I was very impressed, Eric, that you had the number exactly, because I've got it right in front of me, but it's, there's only 3 municipalities in Dunn County that receive the expenditure restraint. And the first is obviously Menominee, both 41.5, excuse me. And then the other one is Colfax, which gets just under 15, and then Elk Mountain gets about 7. And then what Senator Smith is referring to, and I don't think I'm letting the cat out of the bag too much, but our caucus discussions on our side have been talking about doing more with the innovation type funding, more to encourage consolidation, primarily with EMS, and I think about not just our area, but further north and up into the more rural areas, trying to combine some of those services. But we also have, like, for instance, even in Dunn County, we've got Ridgeland, Wilson, some of those are merged fire services, encouraging more efficiency with that if we can, because they're just not making it the way it is. So I could go on a long talk about emergency services, not just in Dunn, but across the state as well. So I'll let you.
Apparently, when it comes to the converging police, it has to be a city above 20,000. So there's a difference there, but they put the emphasis for the smaller communities on the fire, combining fire and EMS. Okay, going further here, this is just an emotional thing, my soapbox, that the Pew Family Research made this statement: when local governments struggle, states pay a price due to lost jobs, reduced tax collections, diminished services, and in extreme cases, costly state bailouts. To minimize harm during economic downturns and support localities' financial stability over the long term, states should review any policies that restrict local budget flexibility, including limitations that states impose on local taxation. States can provide financial aid to local governments to mitigate the impact of tax limitations or offer relief from state mandates that increase costs for local governments. This is an article talking about the process of what the legislature was doing back in 2023. They got together, the Governor Evers and all the lawmakers, and they negotiated, over the proposal which you've been hearing about, the shared revenue, to the municipalities and the counties. And the soapbox is that we rely on our police protection, we rely on fire protection, emergency needs, water, sewer, recycling, garbage, libraries, streets. These are things that we all want, so we want to maintain those. At one time in 1980, we got 33% of our local services from shared revenue, and now by 2021, it was just 11% of municipal budgets, that shared revenue that we get back from the state. So they were having all these discussions back in the beginning of 2023, and then the compromise happened. And this is what I was telling you when I first was talking to you about, hey, I can't believe the governor signed this bill, because it took away our referendums. But there were actually 2 bills that were signed by the governor. One was Act 12 and one was Act 11. And Act 11 was actually about the schools getting money to the private choice schools and independent charter schools, as well as raising revenue limits for the public schools. So the governor, and it sounds like the governor, he said Act 11 was used to reach the goal of passing the shared revenue bill to get the deal across the finish line. Does that sound like the governor?
That was the whole idea, compromise all the way.
Okay, so he actually brought this out for signing these 2 acts. He took it up to the city of Wausau because he likes to do that, apparently, is bring it out into the state. And so this is the ceremony over that June 20th, 2023. Okay. One thing that I had concerns about with looking through the whole law, Act 12, it provided the funding, but since it was not a budget bill, With line item veto, the Republican legislature was able to put many provisions into Act 12 that would not have survived on their own due to the governor's veto. Many parts of Act 12 take away control from the local governments. Some examples of restrictions on local control enacted before this particular bill in June of 2023 were local governments were unable to pass ordinance regulating rentals and requiring restrictions on landlords are more stringent than the state's regulations. Milwaukee had to rescind its attempt to require paid sick leave for people who work in the city. When several cities in the state decided to raise the minimum wage within its boundaries, the legislature enacted a new law forbidding it. The minimum wage remains at $7.25 per hour. Local governments are barred from passing laws from gun safety to the use of plastic bags at grocery stores. And I would like to open this up to the audience. What other restrictions have you known that have happened because of what the legislature says we can or can't do? Can you think of any others that maybe you don't fit our county?
I just know specifically that on the first one you've got there that about landlords, that, what is it, landlords cannot do inspections, or, oh, that property inspectors cannot do inspections of rental properties. It can only be voluntary, it can't be mandated. So the landlord has to voluntarily allow a property inspector to come in and inspect his property if there's been a complaint filed against them. So, yeah, that's not good.
Is that correct? Eric?
So several years ago, there was a law that was passed that restricted what local government can do for inspections on rental properties. New rental properties can have an inspection that can take place. Otherwise, if it's an existing rental property, there's two ways that the city could, like our city could do an inspection. If we have a complaint from the tenant that there's something unsafe that is taking place, they can call our offices and then an inspector can go. Or if the property owner itself, so the landlord, said, I would like to have an inspection done, then our inspectors can come on in. Prior to the law change, we could have routine inspections of rental properties. So that was a law change in approximately, I want to say 2016 to 2017. 2017? All right, well, so I was fairly close.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're right.
That didn't sound, what you said, it did not sound the same as what she said, that they couldn't come in without the property owner's approval.
Yeah, that's what he said, it was voluntary.
Voluntary.
If they want to if they want to voluntarily have a person come in, they can. On complaints, we can go in. If a tenant, and this is.
Yeah.
So if a tenant calls us and says, hey, I think our electrical is not right, then we can have an inspector go.
That's not what I heard.
Okay, I'm sorry on that.
Any other comment too?
I'll just add a little bit too.
Yeah.
For sure.
And then some of you may be familiar, if you do have any rentals or anything, DATCAP is actually in the process of rewriting a lot of the policies and statute that are out there for hotels, boarding houses, Airbnb, that type of stuff as well. But basically, what that first one on there says is that local municipalities can't be any more strict than the state. But I would point out that DATCAP is ran by Governor Evers. It's his agency with his employees in it. So, and like Eric said, it's as far as the inspection, if someone calls, they still have the ability to go in. So it's not like these are being just left unattended and no one's able to check up on them.
I'll just add, since 2011, there's been a terrible anti-renter, but pro-landlord movement in the legislature that has really taken a lot of rights away from renters, eating away at it. And this is a really good example of that. And it needs to stop, and it needs to be reversed because they're really being taken advantage of.
Okay, I think we have some more questions out there. Let's start here.
I just wanted to speak to that as well. I used to be a home health nurse for the county. I went into many homes. I saw homes that were just unbelievable, rental spaces. that were unbelievable. Had plywood on their floors because the floors were so spongy, horrible stairs to go up, all kinds of, I mean, you just couldn't believe the state of those places. And those tenants are not gonna report it because they don't wanna get booted out. So it's really a problem.
I'd like to make a further comment on that. I know someone who works in insurance, and they have told me that when they go to some of these rentals where the landlords want insurance, the insurance companies are refusing, flat out refusing to have anything to do with them because the foundations are falling apart. They're in hazardous conditions. And I've talked to the mayor here, and he's indicated to me that the city is very limited in anything that they can do about these. And is that because of this?
I would say yes, it is because of it, because if you have, we have kind of an interesting set with our persons that are renting. We have a good mix of college students, they're young adults, so they're adults, but they're young, they're inexperienced and naive, they may not necessarily know what their rights are. We have some that just are in a state where they're impoverished and they're worried about being evicted, there's that concern that may be in place. It's a complicated issue, and the law does restrict. Now, prior to that law change, could do regular inspections. So there is a limitation. So if Mayor Knack told you that we are limited in what we can do for inspections, he is correct.
So when somebody does make a complaint, what happens then? Because the impression I got from him was they had to go to the state, the state's gotten the complaint, and nothing.
Our local office can take the complaint, so it'd be our chief building inspector, Dave Koyeski, could take the complaint, and then they begin the process to do an inspection. Oftentimes, though, we do not receive the complaints until probably the most common is when a tenant is moving out, like our college students, for example. If they're moving out and they're being told they're gonna now have to pay part of a deposit or surrender their deposit, then they're making a complaint on issues that may not have been repaired. Whether those things were repaired or not, I don't know. But that's usually what will trigger those inspections that come in. So they're not periodic, it doesn't happen a whole lot anymore. When that law changed, in fact, we changed the structure of our inspections office because the workload had been reduced so much from not having to do the inspections. When one of the inspection positions retired, we didn't fill it. And because we have had some construction, we didn't fill that position out. It sat vacant for about 4 years.
And so you just heard, just your point back there was, they're not, our renters fear complaining because they need housing, right? And every point up there that you see, and many more, is anti-local control. Anti-local control. We have a legislature that has been for years, been anti-local control. I don't care what anybody else says. When you consider, I mean, unbelievable. Milwaukee had to rescind its attempt to require paid sick leave for people who work in the city. They cannot even make their own decision how they want to take care of people who work for them. Milwaukee has been, unfortunately, the worst case of legislators attacking our most important city to this state over and over. And that was part of the deal to pass the shared revenue, by the way, was to take away some rights of Milwaukee because a gun was held to their head that if you want this money, you got to give up these rights. And Milwaukee actually walked in my office and said, we need you to vote for this bill. I know we're going to lose all these rights, but we're not going to survive. We're going to go bankrupt. And they were on the brink of that. And Clint mentioned that already. They were in big trouble when this bill passed. So this is when you're disappointed with the governor signing it, for instance. It was either that or Milwaukee was going under. And it was a really tough situation that a lot of us were really unhappy about.
There are a lot of things in Act 12 that take away local control.
And that, this is just the, start of it, because we haven't even talked about those yet. I mean, it was nice to get the shared revenue, but, what we had to, the cost, taking away local control is a real concern.
Okay, Dick?
To build on Jeff's point there about Milwaukee, I read this today. It seemed like the state wants to take over Milwaukee. So how far is this gonna go? I understand the position of the budget and the emergency need that they had to pass that, but there's taking away all these controls, just feels like it's coming down, down, down to all municipalities. And where does that stop? The other point I'd like to make is that there's other issues that go beyond the dollar accountability in that, and it really stops us from looking forward as a state. I'm referring to the 75% reduction in payments for urban mass transit, a reduction of, I think it was Milwaukee, taking away the streetcar program, and then the last one was a position to promote diversity. What does that have to do with budgeting, et cetera, and where are we going as a state when you start taking away those kind of positions?
Okay, way in the back, is that Jolene?
Janelle.
Janelle.
Hey everyone. I just wanted to reinforce the points that we're hearing right now, because beyond the inspections of local municipalities, it is now illegal for local municipalities to pass local inclusive zoning, which would require a municipality to create affordable homes along with other homes, and that's illegal for a municipality to pass. It's illegal for local municipality to have their own transit authority. We have very few rights locally when it comes to large agribusiness moving into our communities, and so I'm just emphasizing what Senator Jeff Smith said, that since pretty much 2010, 2011, it's just been a relentless, over a couple hundred bills passed that have just been chipping away at local government. And we all know that that hurts us, and I think that the number of people that have shown up today is a really good example. We want to participate in our local government. We want to be able to take care of each other at the local level, and it's really a way to make our democracy really strong. And so I'm really excited to see everyone here, and I'm really excited that this is a conversation we're having, because we really need to reverse this for the health of Wisconsin in general, but also just for the well-being of all of us in the room and our neighbors.
Okay, we're going to continue, because there's a lot of things that you're mentioning now that are actually in Act 12. We ought to be aware of what's in Act 12. So we'll move down here. Before we take a break, I sent out on the emails this site for the Act memo, which I think is a lot easier to read than the legalese that is on the actual bill. But every time there's a bill passed, they do an Act memo by an attorney to try to explain it to us what the law means. And that's done through the Wisconsin Legislative Council, which is a nonpartisan legislative service. It's available to any legislator and their staff. There are 25 employees in this council: attorneys, analysis staff, administrative staff, and they prepare this Act memo for every enactment of the Wisconsin State Legislature. Correct?
Oh, yeah, we depend on that.
Okay, so the main three things that happened with the shared revenue, we've talked a lot about them. The modification of the approach to shared revenue for counties and municipalities, the repeal of the Wisconsin personal property tax, and all the things that happened to the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County so they could get this sales tax. They had to, take on all these restrictions in their local control. Just a history of how we get our income in the state is income taxes as of 1911, sales taxes in 1962, real estate taxes. What's left now is just real property tax, personal property tax being eliminated. And shared revenue, when you look at these statements that come in from the state, they're mailed out by the 15th of September. And what you're going to see is 4 lines. One is the general aid, which was kind of like what we got before. and that's pretty much things that we can use as the city needs. And then there's that utility payment related on usually power production, you know, within the local community. And then there's the new supplemental aid with lots of strings attached, apparently. Is that correct?
Are you talking about the regular shared revenues, or are you talking about
The new
utility aids?
The new supplemental aid is the third line down that they tell you, and they say that there are some restrictions on that because they really want to make sure that we get the proper amount of police protection, fire protection, and EMS, you know, as some of the major things.
Okay, I see what you're saying, like with that innovation funding grant, that's where, I think that's where you're going, so.
Well, then the last line is the innovation grants that you said we've pretty much used up, the 41,000. The innovation grants were at the bottom.
The innovate, I think you're confusing that one with the expenditure restraint program. That's the 41,000 for the ERP. The new supplemental aid for restriction applied for how that one works, where you say the 2 large cities have a 10% increase.
Well, there's the different formulas for different sizes cities, which was hard to, you know, represent that for every size city, but it's different between smaller cities and larger cities.
I can only talk about the aids that come to this city, because it is complicated for the other cities, so I wouldn't be able to speak to Milwaukee. You want to tackle that one?
Come on, Eric, I don't know all the cities.
I know, I'm sorry. All right, so yeah, number 3, the new supplemental aid, the reason that was set up separate, the 3 big stakeholders I mentioned before, the counties, the towns, legal municipalities, couldn't agree on changing the current supplemental aid. So they said, okay, we're gonna start over, this is the new one. So what changed the most from the start on that, from what I saw, was the 2 largest cities initially had gotten 10%. Actually, I think it might have been a little less than that initially, and they had negotiated up. My district, so like Menominee, more rural area, Senator Smith, so this included like Eau Claire, for instance, they originally started at, it could have been a 5% increase, so much, much smaller. We had negotiated, and I should say we, rural legislators, it wasn't necessarily Democrat or Republican type thing, it was negotiating more for our areas, because I literally had townships that were gonna get like a $2,000 increase with the 5% or whatever. So it guaranteed a 20% increase. Number 4 on there, the innovation grants, that is for municipalities that wanna combine maybe to improve efficiency. So not necessarily like a city of Menominee that has a professional fire service, but more like, say, Wheeler, Boyceville, Ridgeland, some of those is kind of what I'm thinking. But it could be for the larger ones too. And then it did require that municipalities maintain their current law enforcement that they had. So the big deal with that was when we saw defund the police movement in bigger cities like Minneapolis or Milwaukee, and they're already struggling to keep law enforcement anyway, but they couldn't cut those positions. So in order to get that innovation grant, they had to maintain the staffing level that they had. It couldn't shrink.
Thank you very much for that explanation. Okay, we talked about the repeal of personal property tax. And actually, it's very interesting to know that when Wisconsin was a territory, the primary source of revenue was personal property tax, and that was a tax on clothing, jewelry, furniture, and other valuable items. So thank goodness we're through with that. It had gotten pretty, you know, not very consistent with taxing everybody the same. So it was nice to throw that one out. Then the Milwaukee specific provisions for sales tax, they had to accept a lot of things at the same time as receiving that ability to use the sales tax. Okay, now this is for the entire state. The rest of these things that we're talking about affect the entire state, that they want to maintain law enforcement, fire, and EMS departments. Maintain expenditures in these departments, the number of employees, the level of training, and the response time for emergencies. And like there is a difference between the size of the cities. You don't have this applying to the cities less than 20,000, according to that act. And then there's a report of high school incidents, which I think probably is a pretty good one. I don't know how you feel about that. You know, I mean, it would be nice to know about homicide, sexual assaults, theft, battery, and all that. So they had to develop a program with the Department of Public Instruction and the Department of Justice to be able to tabulate, you know, the statistics. And I think that's probably helpful for all of us. And then there's the authority to join police department and fire departments. Previously, only cities could form joint police or fire departments. But with this law, this was now that the cities, villages, and towns could form the joint police and fire departments. And I'm assuming that is a good thing too, a good change with this law.
I don't think that's entirely true, because I live in the town of Brunswick, and there are 5 towns that have historically, and I was a town chair 25 years ago, we had a combined 5-town fire department. So we always had that ability. It was really rare though for that to happen. We may have been the only one in the state, but what this was supposed to do was really just to motivate towns to do that same thing.
Yeah, if I could build on that, it is accurate that you do have some joint fire departments. You have like Wilson and Baldwin and Hammond have what's called United Fire, so they're a combined fire service on here. I would agree that it's there to try to encourage departments to look at pooling resources. And in fact, we're waiting for the overall innovation grant rules to come out for how we can get to the shared revenue. And what we're talking about right now is providing EMS services for our towns through the county. Because right now it's gotten so exponentially expensive for our townships to try to pay for both fire apparatus as well as emergency services like medical services, having paramedics and EMTs. And right now locally the city of Menominee is having conversations with our towns about trying to get to the catch up on a per capita. And that's a very difficult conversation for people to have, and it's a lot of money. And so whereas I think one of the nice things about this grant, once those rules are released here this spring, there may be opportunities to try to help provide aid to those towns to be able to meet those needs, as well as getting out to the further reaches of our county, whether that's through somehow our Menominee Fire Department or through another service where we can get those desperately needed paramedic or advanced life support services and then have some reduced costs with some aids coming in from the state. So I think that ultimately is going to be a good thing once that's released. But it's been a complicated process. The innovation planning grant portion of it has been released, and now communities that are 5,000 and less, so like a lot of your villages and towns and small cities, can start applying for that, and they can have a technical aid planner come and work with them as to how they can try to pool resources and apply for this grant and then be successful at it. So I think that is a positive that came out of this legislation, or at least I think it is.
We hope so.
We're hoping.
Okay, and then there's a requirement for comparative report on local spending, and I don't see that as a negative thing, you know, that we get to know exactly how our communities spend their money. This is my big problem when I found out about this bill, that I was really offended that we could no longer do this. And I'm not sure that that last point that I have here is all. I think we can do more referenda than those 4 things. But it's nice to be able to think about having advisory referendums again, if we could do that.
Well, I've been waiting to get to this point.
I saw your presentation that you did on the internet.
Yeah, so I happen to have been the author of Citizen Initiative, which you see in other states, Ohio, Michigan, states around the country who offer that ability using parameters that citizens have to follow to get enough citizens behind something. You can put it on the ballot and actually make law or rescind bad law that is hurting them. And it's properly done, not the California law way necessarily, where you end up with 50 different places to look at. But having really strict restrictions or how you get something on there to make sure it's real. I think that's really important. We talk about local control. That's true local control. And yes, we've had advisory referendum for years, and now we've lost that ability. And that was just advisory. You know how many times, and you mentioned a couple already, what happened in Dunn County, advisory referendum on Medicaid expansion, advisory referendum on fair maps, advisory referendum on Citizens United. They get ignored. But obviously, they hit a nerve.
I'm wondering if you can tell me what they didn't want to hear about. Was it marijuana laws? Was it, abortion? Was it like other counties? Because we were the first county to do it on medical care, that we wanted medical care for everyone.
Yeah.
And so that was going to go out to all the other counties. Did they want to stop that? What did they want to stop?
You will need to ask them, whoever them they are, right?
Well, that's you guys.
But okay. Sorry, I got to throw this out there. I say that sorry because Clinton is sitting next to me.
I'll talk later.
20, I know you will. 28 out of the last 30 years, the majority party has been Republican. 28 out of the last 30 years. And if you're not clear about how important that is in creating the committees that we have, chairing the committees that we have, deciding what bills get heard at committees and what bills get to the floor. I mean, only the majority party makes those decisions. 28 out of the last 30 years has come from one source. Now, those are the people you need to ask. As you know, as I just mentioned, I favor citizen initiative. I favor Final Five voting. Another really important change in how we run our elections. I mean, there's a number of things, but that's me. We have 132 legislators. It takes a lot of work, but it's important to ask all legislators one-on-one, are these sorts of things that you care about? And you just listed a whole number of things that I think that's the way it works. You need to approach your legislators, I don't care who it is, and say, I'm checking it off. If you favor this, if you favor that, if you favor that, or don't favor those things that you particularly value. And not everybody values the same thing you do, Lorene, or I do, right? And I get that. And that's why we have this great democracy that makes these decisions. And I know he's chomping at the bit behind me here.
Well, I knew this one was coming.
Clint, I didn't understand what he said. What kind of voting?
Final Five voting. It's we can talk about that at another point.
It's the state of Alaska.
Oh, ranked choice.
Yes, exactly.
Michael, you've heard of it before, I know you have.
Yes.
So I think we've talked about it before. So, this particular one for me was not a big, exciting issue for me. I obviously am local control. Obviously, I will speak on behalf of my caucus on this, the concerns. Obviously, and I don't know how valid it is, honestly, so I'm going to discount it a little bit, but the cost, put these advisory referendum out there that are not actionable, that was the argument against it. I personally would rather hear from my constituents. I mean, I put out surveys, polls, and the argument was that a local municipality or a county could do the same thing. Put a survey in with our tax bills. It might change the outcome though right now when I paid mine on Thursday afternoon, but put that stuff out there because as a legislator, I do want to hear what's important. Whether it might be fair maps, I think that was important to maybe Ellen perhaps, but and I voted for that too, by the way, but we want to know what's out there. So I'm not one of the ones that really supported that. It came as part of the package deal, and in order to help my constituents in my district get as much out of the shared revenue as possible, yeah, I voted for it, and so did Senator Smith. Was I really excited? No, I kind of plugged my nose on it, because if it's going to upset people, they can't have advisory referendums, go for it, put it out there. I just soon, you have the ability to put a referendum out there, and we know what you think, because it does shape state policy. It's not necessarily the most efficient, just because it's not actionable. it doesn't really go anywhere. And I think Senator Smith mentioned, we'll take a referendum and then we don't act on it or do anything. So I guess what's the point in doing it was the argument. So for me, I would have been just fine peeling that out of there. So not to throw my caucus under the bus, but
I will add, there is a point still, and I didn't mean to say there was no point to it, because it's obviously hit, like I said, it's a nerve. And that's what you need to do, and I think that's important, that citizens get a chance to hit the nerve. And also, marijuana is a good example. Medical marijuana, 80% when you pass referendums across the state say yes, of course we should do that, right? So that really makes it difficult for the leadership who chooses, and I'm gonna throw one person under the bus. Robin Voss is really the block of marijuana, and from what I can tell. So one person who's got a powerful position doesn't, and it's embarrassing to him to have to see these sorts of things pass, right? So it is what it is. It's human nature to say, I don't want this to happen anymore because it's making me look bad. But it's unfortunate. But again, I did vote for it. I did vote to pass this because we had to. We had to save Milwaukee. We needed to change shared revenue, a wholesale change. And then this is the price we're paying. And the way I look at it, it just makes us have to work harder to make sure that your voice is heard in other ways. And hopefully through citizen initiative, we'll pass that someday.
I just have a comment that's prohibiting a local referendum. To me, seems like a prevention of free speech, which is a big deal.
And I want to add something to that. The advisory referenda were often things that a county or a city would put together and throw it out to the voters of that county. And then that message would be coming from the county as a whole, not just from the county government, which could send you such a message, but from the people of the county. So this is restricting the speech of the county unit. Take this off the map. And it's really embarrass you.
Okay, Mike.
One of the things that I've
They
seen.
give a mic permission to speak, Lorraine?
Yes, I am.
One of the things I've seen as we tried to get advisory referendum over the years is that the county board or the city board that was looking at it will say, well, what's it gonna cost us? Because they've got tight budgets. And in every case that we got one on and got it passed was that they were already having a referendum, so it didn't cost any more to put that on. And so the argument against the cost of referendum, I think, is hollow. The local governments will make damn sure they've got the money to cover it. And I think with the Citizens United decision that came out of our wonderful Supreme Court, we already have a very difficult time as citizens communicating with our government, because our governments on the federal level and in some cases on the state level are open to bribery. People can say, I want this passed, and then I'll give you that much money. And nothing shows it more than the last election. And I think it's time the American people wake up, and they're going to have to do something about that, and that's a very difficult thing to tackle.
Okay, we're going to move on.
I'm just going to chime in just a little bit, because he actually clarified the point I was getting at, and I don't know if I quite made it. But, you know, as far as my opinion on it, I would like to have seen it where it wasn't proposed as a separate advisory referendum with nothing else on the ballot. That's what Clint Moses would have been in favor of. That's not overall what the caucus discussed and what we ended up agreeing on, because otherwise the cost is, the argument's very hollow. There is none.
Somebody in the back, way back.
Okay, somebody that hasn't talked before.
Stood up, no.
Okay, yeah. I want to tie 3 points together from the beginning to now. Is the beginning you mentioned the 3 big players, the League of Municipalities, whatever. Are those lobbyists?
They have lobbyists. They certainly have lobbyists.
So they're muting us already.
I will,
They're representing us how?
I would suggest to you though, the Wisconsin Towns Association, by the way, is my favorite. Their lobbyists are themselves. They are the administrator, Mike, and Mike Coles and a couple of others who work behind, they work in the office, but they have the license to lobby us, and they use that. League of Municipalities, same thing. Jerry Duchesne is the executive director, but he is also a licensed lobbyist. So sometimes you have to distinguish, and same with Counties Association. They do, I think, use a contract lobbyist. Yeah. But you know, it's okay. Lobbyist is not an evil word. I want to be sure you're a lobbyist because you're talking to me right now.
Okay.
Right? Okay.
Well, in your,
Yeah, I should clarify that too with those three. I know a lot of times lobbyists, they want to be called advocates, whatever it is, but it gives a slimy feel to it. Those three organizations, like the senator just said, like the towns, for instance, they'll have regional, like I'll go to the Chippewa County towns or the Eau Claire or the Dunn County towns. And it's people just like you, it's basically the town chairman, people are, and some of you probably in this room have been to these meetings, and they'll sit down and they'll go through, they give us like 5 minutes to talk about whatever, but the main purpose of us being there is to listen to them about what issues, whether it's agricultural road funding or utility issues. They do all hire lobbyists as well, but the actual executive director, whatever the title is, those are the ones we pay attention to the most. And they're the ones that are doing the negotiation with the local elected officials. So like Eric is involved with the League of Municipalities. He's voicing his concerns to them, and then they have one typically unified front, similar to like what WASB would be if you're involved with school boards, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. You know, they'll put forward a unified front for all the school districts or the majority of school districts in the state of Wisconsin. But the counties, for instance, you know, I have a direct relationship with Mark O'Connell, who's their executive director, who will come and tell me if something's a great idea or a bad idea or this or that. But so it's not like, we're not quite like DC, but sometimes I think we're closer than we should be.
And I want to apologize if you wanted to probably make a stronger point, so I'll let you.
Well, now it's gonna be really, the school funding, this is something I've been paying close attention to for a while. I have a child in middle school here, and since COVID, we've had it virtual because honestly, we don't trust the school district to keep him safe. I don't. He might, I don't. So he's safe in my home. My son's funding through the state is the same as any student in a public school, but the people who are getting school choice vouchers, their funding is higher, but it comes through the school district. This is something I'm very upset about because school districts are needing the money, but somehow the state has decided that people sending their kid to a private school is worth more. Now, the third, thank you. The third thing I was gonna say is the rental issue. A lot of poor people cannot afford to complain about their rentals. And I'm fortunate that I stumbled into a homeowner situation. We got to rent to own our house and now we own it outright. We could not move from this house in this economy, in this town especially, because we can't afford another property. It's just that cut and dry. You know, if we had to leave our home, we would be living in a 2-bedroom apartment, hopefully in Eau Claire, Jeff. So a lot of people don't want to spend too much, but everybody wants to make the most. And I think that's a problem that needs to be viewed from multiple angles instead of just saying, okay, you know, industry is the king. Well, bullshit, because if the people don't live here, you can't run the businesses. So I don't know if you guys caught my tangle, but thanks.
I think a lot of people appreciate what you just said in many ways. You open a big can of worms with the school funding, that would be a whole nother topic for a full day. But I'm with you on that. And And you're right, we need, that is an issue with our culture right now, is not in so many ways treasuring the workforce that actually makes businesses successful, right? And that's a huge issue, yeah. Janelle?
Okay, I'm going to go down to the next one here. We've discussed all that. No minority hiring preference is supposed to apply to all of our local communities. Previously, there was no prohibition in the law for local units of government to adopt hiring and procurement preferences to mediate historic discrimination. This act prohibits both discriminating against and granting preferential treatment to persons of certain protected classes when making employment decisions or contracting for public work, except if it is required to secure federal aid. And the classes that we're talking about are race, color, ancestry, national origin, or sexual orientation. And I'd like to address this to our legislators.
Obviously, on the second to last paragraph, you see the disclaimer, so it has to be in compliance with federal law. But the idea was complete equality and not giving preference to one class over the other. So basically, it opened for the most qualified individuals for it. So, I mean, it's pretty straightforward in my opinion.
We will differ on this one. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It became a rallying cry for the most extreme that we live with. And it's a shame. It's, again, anti-local control. I mean, there's so many things you can say what's wrong with that policy that we passed as a state so that we could get the funding we needed into our municipalities, or into Milwaukee especially. But DEI became a dirty thing to say and to actually stand for. Diversity, equity, and innovation. Inclusion. Sorry, we call it innovation.
We do it now.
Yeah. And a local example is that Dana Walks on the board of, the Board of Regents. Thank you. When the time came, of course we have a problem with our state senate that doesn't even hear and approve our appointments these days. But when they do, it's like, uh-oh, now I'm up for a vote. I know where that's going, and Dana was one of those. Fired him because of his vote he took on the board for about DEI. Unbelievable where our society is going. That's more important than actually making sure we're lifting people up.
Okay, I'll move on here. Business closures to control communicable disease outbreaks affects the function of our local health departments. Previous law directs local health officers to take measures necessary to prevent, suppress, and control communicable disease, and to forbid public gatherings when deemed necessary to control outbreaks or epidemics. The law now prohibits local health officials from mandating closure of one or more businesses for longer than 30 days to control outbreaks or epidemics. Only one 30-day extension of a mandate may occur if it's approved by the relevant local governmental body. This law prohibits distinguishing between essential and non-essential businesses. Well, I don't think that legislators are medical people. Am I wrong? I am really quite perturbed, that when you won't allow our local health departments not to do what they feel is proper to protect the public. I mean, this is not individuals. This is the entire public. This is everybody. This is a concern for community. So I'd like to know how you feel about that, both of you.
Lorraine, it does allow, obviously, beyond the 30 days for like a county board vote or a municipal vote to extend it beyond that. And I think you might be incorrect on that because I thought it could be extended subsequent times. Now, this, and it does not take into account, like if the governor declares a state of emergency again, obviously he still has that authority over the top of this as well. I think they could still extend it. I get the impression she's looked at this a few times.
Yeah.
I trust Lorraine.
Next section. Yep.
We'll accept it either way.
Go back.
There you go.
Okay, there it is, yeah. Okay, it's pretty brief.
Okay, it does say 130-day extension. So I stand corrected on that, but that was obviously response to the COVID stay-at-home orders that were out there. Now, the governor could still have a state of emergency in place, which would over the top of all local, which I know is not a local control issue. But beyond that, I don't know if you want to talk about this one.
I do. Exactly. You took the words right out of my mouth.
What did you say?
We could have a disaster or a pandemic that hits regionally, but not covering the whole state. So the governor is not going to be able to make that. And Lorraine, we do not have doctors in the legislature, unfortunately. We should probably have a couple of doctors.
We have a couple doctors in the federal level, and I'm not sure that they're the greatest.
Well, there you go. There you go. But this is tragic because we went through a pandemic, and now we're going to legislators are going to respond in this way. There's a bill that just was introduced, by the way, to expand that, so that we could not close or we could not prevent gatherings in churches during pandemics or cases like this. Now, I probably will be really beat up about saying that that's a wrong-minded bill, because it's all about crowds that disperse from that place and spread a disease to others. We're not talking about protecting yourself. We're talking about you not spreading a disease to others, and it's the same with vaccines. And we go right down this rabbit hole now, and I'm not going to. But it's wrong thinking based on trying to appease the most radical group of people in this country right now, rather than looking out for what's best for all of us.
And we're going to see another pandemic in our lifetime. In my lifetime, it's not going to be that much longer than what I've got now.
You and me.
Okay, and then there's also a lot of, looks like, favoritism, in these particular items. And I did send most of you an email about what's in this bill, but we have local control taken away in many different ways, with these pieces of this bill. Control over quarrying operations, control over ambulance staffing. EMS certification has been taken away from our Department of Health Services. The Knowles stewardship projects, and I think someone here has a question about, something new happening with the Knowles stewardship, Nelson Knowles stewardship project. And yes.
Well, in my reading of the Cap Times last week, I noticed an article that the bipartisan Knowles, Nelson Knowles, conserving land, conserving waters, that funding is in jeopardy now. And since 1989, it has conserved millions of acres in Wisconsin for, as that says, wildlife, but it sequesters carbon because it protects the trees. You have the oxygen carbon dioxide exchange. You have the soil erosion that's prevented in this name of conservatism and being conservative. And there's no better way you can spend money for the future than to conserve land. With climate change, we need to do everything we can to mitigate the greenhouse gases. And I just think it's so short-sighted that the legislature is using that funding for, there's a good chance that they're not gonna fund it, put it that way, and that's according to the cap times.
Do you want to address that?
That has been an issue every budget that we work through. The governor will, I'm sure, guarantee the governor is going to have in his budget funding that's necessary. I guarantee that the Joint Finance Committee, which is 12 Republicans and 4 Democrats, will remove it from the budget and come up with some other number that you and I would probably agree is inadequate. But it's a constant fight. It has been, it's gone through the courts actually recently about how one legislator, and this has happened recently, and this is why I went to the courts, was one legislator anonymously can stand in the way of funding or a purchase being made using that funding. And the courts have finally stepped up and said they can't be anonymous and they can't, that just isn't the way government should work. But it has happened in the past, so it's valuable. There's no question about it. We're going to have to continue to fight. Some of us will continue to fight for it and hopefully preserve that.
I can say I've supported the Knowles Nelson as well. I think one of the bigger concerns within my caucus is how it's being used. In the past, some of that has been used more in urban areas and not so much in rural as far as land conservation, more to improve green space, walkways, that type of stuff, which you can make an argument is a good thing for people who live in urban areas too. Me being in a rural area, I'm concerned obviously that we're preserving our creeks, our forests, all that good stuff. So I will continue to support it. I do agree with Senator Smith. It will be in the governor's budget, like it always is. JFC will probably strip it out, which I don't sit on. But then I would assume they'll come back with some type of funding for it. I don't know what that will be, to be honest, but that's just what it is.
This may be a naive question, but coming back to some of the concerns that we're talking about with resolutions, even unbinding resolutions, how do we help make that happen again?
You're talking about referendums.
Yeah.
Okay. Lorraine saw my latest video. I've written a column every week through all the time I've been in the legislature, but we switched now to doing video. So tune in, check out my videos, but one of the latest ones, one of my first ones, the new year, was on the governor's announcement that he fully supports and is going to be in his budget the idea of a citizen initiative. So it's going to take, full legislative support to get it back the way it, and of course this is binding referendum I'm talking about, not the advisory. So it would be a huge change here in Wisconsin, and it would be a welcome change by some of us. And so that it's just going to have to be, it's going to be a fight, like anything else. And you know what? Nothing's worth anything if we don't have to fight for it, right? And I hope that you all will stand up for that.
Lorraine, I just can add one question. In order to do that, every time we make a phone call or send a letter, you guys keep track of it in your offices. So even if I said, Jeff, I support that, you click it off. So Ms. Wood, you would say the same thing. So you can see the numbers. So we don't have to go into a half-hour presentation. We can just say, I don't agree with that, and it will be counted as whatever.
Yeah,
or do we have to go into a dissertation?
Yep, totally. It does not matter if we agree with it or not. I want to know actually more from people that disagree with me than those that agree and tell me I'm doing a great job.
The other thing that I want
it goes
is
in a
the
forward
surveys.
database.
The surveys that are sent out by the different sides are biased. I can't answer some of them. I don't have the options I need to answer surveys. And it bothers me because it's going to your offices as feedback, and you're not getting my feedback. And I feel slighted.
Yes.
Well, we always try to leave a comments on there, because like, for instance, I'm guilty of this. I put out a survey, I think between Christmas and New Year's was my last one. And because of the state surplus, I approached it from what taxes are the most important for you to cut. And I was expecting this time of year, it's a little biased, but I expected with property tax bills coming, I thought that would be higher up. I was surprised it was a close tie. We had a little over 600 responses, which is good for an assembly rep, maybe not a senate, but about 600 responses, and it was tied between income tax and property tax. I had a few people that were angry because I didn't give the option of raising taxes, because to be honest, it never crossed my mind. I'm like, we got a budget, we could spend it for other services and stuff like that, but I had a few on there, so it is hard to craft a survey yourself, and we don't have professional survey people doing this stuff for us. I have had the university here do a couple for me in the past. But I always have a comment section on there. So if there's something you disagree with, or I didn't even think of it, put your idea on there. We do track it all on a forward database. The biggest challenge right now with some of us that changed district numbers, I was Assembly District 29, I'm now 92. I'm getting a ton of responses on a bridge issue in Trempealeau County. Send that to Representative Trey Pruszynski in the new 29th. I'm also getting a bunch of stuff in my old district related to the 5,000 acre solar farm up in St. Croix County. Send those to Representative Rob Krybeck, but if you do reach out to the wrong office, we forward that on. So if I get something that's related to Senator Smith, and Senator Smith is new to me, I had Senator Stashel before, even though he's a Democrat, if I have a constituent issue, my office is instructed to let him know so he's aware of it as well.
And that was a public service message for today. So, but I'll get back to your question, Jane, and what you just heard Clint say. And Clint admitted that was a biased question he asked because it was, he didn't add, or what would you like us to spend the surplus on, right? Right, so there's that. I have my own views of that. I don't think we should just be sending a $30 check back to people that they can't use to hire a new police officer with. I think people pay.
All right. You're good.
That's fine. You all right?
Okay.
You all right?
So anyways, my answer would be, we're expected to responsibly use the funds we collect to benefit the community. And that would be my answer to what that surplus. But yeah, I certainly understand that, and I'm sure mine were biased that way. So.
Okay, I think I'm gonna move on here. I really wanted to talk about the TIDs.
Kids?
Yes.
There you go.
We're gonna get Eric.
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go. There we go.
So I want you to see how big it is. Is that about half of Menominee that's in TIDs?
I would say a good 40% of it is in a tax increment district, maybe 35. But we have several active TIDs, as you can see, about 6 of them there. One of them is very big.
I've got 7 listed
There
here.
you go, 7.
Yeah. Well, these are, we hope that through these TIDs you can increase development. We really do not mind the increased taxes if you can make our community better. So, but what I have a question, in Act 12, they wanted to limit TIDs, and I'll just go to that.
Could you just, a little comment on TIDs?
Do you know what TIDs are?
Well, in general.
Tax increment districts? Is that okay if we talk a little bit about what it's?
Big thing real quick though.
I'll
got something here, but.
be super fast. So tax increment district is a district that is created in cooperation with the various taxing jurisdictions in the area. So Dunn County School District of Menominee area, Chippewa Valley Technical College, and then the city of Menominee. Only municipalities can create a tax increment district. They are there in place in order to try to promote economic development, and then with recent changes as well as housing developments. What happens is when a TID is created, a base value for taxes is created and locked in. And then any kind of increased value in property tax in that area is called increment. That increment, that extra piece that is created, gets put into a tax increment district bank, for lack of a better term, and then that money can be utilized to make road improvements, put in utilities, use incentives to bring in housing, use incentives to bring in manufacturing. This is done through the tax dollars for the organizations and the people that are inside of those tax increment districts. So you're not getting a pass on tax dollars. Your tax dollars are not going to be going into that. It is our only tool to do economic development within our community. And the purpose is to try to grow those without having to take out general obligation notes and bonds, to try to grow and repair roads and utilities in those areas. It is an exceptionally great tool that has been utilized here in the city of Menominee in cooperation with the other taxing jurisdictions. It is what has helped bring us in, like the 3Ms of the world, the Anderson windows, and the distribution center. Is that quick? That's quick for me. I'm very chatty.
That's good. That was quick. Okay, it is to stimulate the growth in a wider tax base. And it used to be that the levy limit could be increased to 100% of net new construction, or net new construction, and if there is urban renewal project with replacement of old buildings, the levy could be increased by the value of the new buildings minus the value of the replaced buildings. The Act 12 significantly decreases the TID closure adjustment that allows for increasing the tax levy. So I'm wondering, is this because the legislature doesn't like TIDs and they think there's something better out there? Or what's the reason for restricting TIDs?
Well, I can't read minds yet. I'm going to work on it. I would say they're, just because of the nature of tax increment districts, they are complicated. And anytime you're talking about economic development, you're talking about taxes, you're talking about pilot programs, PAYGO programs within tax increment financing, which tax increment financing is what comes out of a tax increment district. There's confusion that comes into play, and most often I hear confusion is that, well, why are my property taxes going into paying for tax increment financing? When I hear that, it tells me they don't quite understand what a tax increment district is and how tax increment financing works. And there are some legislators that I feel do not fully understand that, or just flat out don't believe in that we shouldn't be doing any of those things, that the manufacturers or the developers should just do that all on their own. I'm hopeful that in this next budget cycle that's coming out, that we will be able to revert back to what the old rules were for the tax increment financing and tax increment districting rules were. Will that happen? I don't know. As you've heard from these two gentlemen, there's been complicated compromises that take place. We're going to use gentlemen here. If you'd said it to me, I'd have to look behind me. But anyhow, I'm hoping that we can get back to that process, because the tax increment districts and the tax increment financing is truly the only way that we can stimulate economic development and growth. And I'm going to touch on it a little bit more. And one of the recent things that I thought has been very nice about the state is that they really embrace that housing is a real challenge, and we have to do things with it, and then that has in turn allowed us to be a little bit more flexible with tax increment districts by providing incentives for housing development. And we did that with the Eco Cottage and the Maplewood Eco Cottages development by the middle school, along with the Estover development that's taking place that helped us build 250 housing units. So where we'd also like to see improvement there is the legislature to create funding mechanisms through the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Association. The downside of that one is that there are restrictions got put in. If you are providing tax increment financing, you are not eligible for the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Association funding, and vice versa. So where we hear from the developers, and it is true, that because the inflationary costs and building materials, labor costs, they're looking at communities where if they can't get in mass density real fast to be able to turn around the build to making a profit, they're not coming around. So you need to be able to have these other kinds of gap financing opportunities through both WIDA and TIF, but right now you can't have both. So being able to marry those two up would really help development. The other piece that I'll throw in, and again, I'm gonna hand it to the legislature, did a good job with this by recognizing our downtowns in very small areas, which also has a tax increment district on the map that was up there before. Our downtown buildings need some renovation. You know, they're old brick buildings, they need tuck pointing, they need new windows and all kinds of different electrical. Very complicated, very expensive. The renovation funds that come in through the Wisconsin WIDA as well as Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, you cannot utilize some of those funds in conjunction with tax increment financing through those districts as well. And part of that, I'm guessing, this is a guess, so again, I can't read the minds on it, is they're looking at it because even if you make let's say one of our downtown buildings needs tuck pointing, so the brickwork needs work, that is extremely expensive. $200,000 would be probably a cheap job, more likely in about $400,000. The incremental value it would create in the building, maybe $10,000. So that's part of what the challenge is on there. So why, and when I've had conversations with your colleagues and as well as the League of Municipalities to try to push to remove that barrier so that way we can beautify our downtowns, and in particular that's really important here, not just selfishly because I live here, but also it helps attract people to come to our university, that we can attract talent to stay in our community, to open businesses and grow our population, try to fill our labor needs that we need because our industries are running short of being able to hire people. This tax increment financing and the tax increment districts combined with the housing and making sure that these things marry up with each other is so critically important to keep our community growing. And as it was mentioned before, our assessment values have gone down the last 4 years. And this last one, we lost $30-some million in assessed value. This is so critically important for us, and it was one of the reasons why our budgeting cycle was so unpleasant this year, and why our council and mayor was stressed, and I was stressed, and people were feeling the squeeze. So it's a complicated issue. Thank you for bringing it up, by the way, too.
Well, we just want to give you the opportunity to grow our community.
We would like to grow it, and I feel good that I think we can get there. I think that this was just a small step back, but I'm confident because of that our legislature is looking at that. And some of those folks that maybe had some of those challenges with TID are no longer in the legislature. I'm hoping that we'll be able to make headway.
Do you have anything to say about TIDs, either of you?
So,
and that'll be our last thing that we do here.
Yeah, we're losing people pretty quickly here. All I can really add, I've been around this a long time, and TIF districts we really have legislators who are totally against them, others that really depend on them. And we have to pass a bill for every TIF district proposed. Separate legislation has to go through us for every single TIF district. And that's when, you know, it kind of pits one district against another, that sort of thing. And I think there are probably better ways we can do this. And this is great for me too. And I would guess you feel the same way. I just learned a lot, you know, because we don't know how they affect municipalities until we hear from them, right? So, and it's really important. I don't think that was ever considered that, oh, we need to combine our housing proposal and make sure that they can get a TIF district and vice versa. And that just probably was not in the mix when this was discussed at all. But again, I just want to say, you need to be aware, every single time one TIF district is needed, we have to pass another bill to get it done. And you know how slow we are in getting anything done.
Well, he kind of stole my point basically, but that is the biggest challenge is if Menomony's got a TIF district, I have to get my colleagues, regardless of their political affiliation, to see why it's important to pass it. So it ends up pitting more the Chippewa Valley or western Wisconsin against, Appleton or the Fox River Valley, something like that. But this last session, we did do a real estate package. Some of those bills are gonna be coming back, addressing kind of the revitalization, I think, of our downtowns where they've got a lot of second story that used to be dwelling that needs to be fixed up. So there was incentives for that ties the WIDA programs with the TIB. And then also another one addressed the big box stores that are going vacant because they're going more and more online, looking at getting creative with using those properties as far as housing and multi-purpose use type stuff as well. And then the other thing I'll add, a legislator that's not here today that geeks out on this stuff, I mean, this is his area, is Representative David Armstrong, who picked up the northern part of Dunn County that I used to have. He is the Economic Development Director for Barron, so he is a fan of this, and he can talk about this stuff until he's blue in the face. But he still does his economic development job for Barron County very part-time, and then he's a legislator with me, came in with me 4 years ago. So I think we've got more support in the legislature for these types of things, and this is where it's important for us to be talking to our locals like Eric and our other city officials as well. Unfortunately, the mayor talks to me too much. I'd much rather talk to Eric since he's not here to defend himself today, so.
Let's pick on Randy.
He's not telling you what to do. Okay.
When I looked through Act 12, it seemed to me that many items appeared to represent special interest groups rather than the collective good for our communities. In my exposure to the local government in Dunn County and Menominee, people of all political stripes that represent us discovered that they have a responsibility to provide services to our community. It makes no difference if they are Republican or Democrat, Libertarian or Progressive. Who is it better to determine what a city, village, or township needs other than those that live here? How can a politician in the legislature who lives in southeastern Wisconsin decide what we need up here in western Wisconsin? We have concerns about special interest groups and the wealthy, getting all the legislation passed for them. We feel they have too much representation. We want our state representatives to represent us. And what I hear today is it's happening here. And I appreciate both of you for being here. And I appreciate our city executive, Eric, being here. So that's it. We're done.
Go for it. Haven't been sitting. This has been great. Thank you. All three of us. I mean, my question to the three of you is, would you be willing to come again? I mean, this is really good hearing what you have to say. This is a specific topic. I can see that advantage of teachers you in this. Would you?